I'm Tom Johnson, Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. Over the many years I've been in business, we've worked on a lot of clock cases. Let's take a look at some of the more memorable jobs. Come on now. I'm Tom Johnson, Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. This is a nice tall clock case. It most certainly is from the first half of the 19th century. The owner of the clock knew it was from Scotland. The clockworks aren't here. They've gone to the clockmaker for cleaning. The face of the clock has a name on it, which is indistinguishable. But they discovered on the back of the face of the clock the names Bell and Udell, which were clockmakers in Edinburgh, Scotland, from 1832 to 1849. So, although the style of this clock is certainly what we would call a federal style earlier, maybe these side windows, which have a little Gothic thing going on, are more indicative of its age. It's not in bad shape. It's certainly been refinished in the past. It's got a few things wrong with it. Loose veneer up here on top, a little chip out of this frame of the door, but most importantly, as you can see, the whole base is coming apart. It's coming unglued, and there's a lot of veneer missing. This is basically mahogany, but this veneer along the edge is rosewood, and a lot of it's missing. I'll start by removing the door. Now I'm going to remove these brass mounts that hold the pillars. I've got to glue this molding back together, and also I think we're going to polish up the brass. I got a few things I've got to glue on this bonnet: molding, this inner frame. But I think I'll start with these little veneered panels here. All right, I've cut out some weird shaped blocks, put plastic tape on this side. These will fit right in here, so I can glue these panels down. So now I'm going to use the heat gun and my palette knives, see if I can get these fields of veneer to lift up. Alright, now I'm going to work on the door. So the door's got some veneer problems. I'll glue those down, but the worst part is that the door is cracked straight across here. And I'm going to glue that back together. I hope the glue can hold. I'm worried about the glass though. I don't want to take this glass out. I can see that it's moving without hitting the glass. I think I'm going to remove some putty along here. I want to make sure there's plenty of room for that glass to move if I clamp this downward. Okay, I've got all this putty out of here now. Now with the putty and the glass gone, I have the extra benefit of being able to open this up a little better and cleaning the old glue out. Okay, we'll see if that holds. Okay, I'm always anxious to see how these glue-ups have worked out. Oh, it looks good. Yeah, it's down. I've discovered the here, well, the center inlay is a little bit loose too. Even though I've got a little more work to do on the bonnet here, I want to get started on the case. There's repairs to do on the door, so I think I'll take it off. Now the main thing that's wrong with this cabinet and why it came in here was because of this break. The whole side is loose. It doesn't want to pull back to where it belongs. I'm hitting the bottom here. I think it's probably because the panel, the substrate panel onto which this veneer is glued, has shrunk. So I've got to figure out exactly what I'm going to do about that. I'm thinking to try to fill this gap is fruitless, a little foolish. This whole side is already loose. These three panels that make up the base, they're just nailed along here and nailed into the back. I think I'm going to remove them. I'm going to start with removing the glue blocks from the bottom, which are mostly loose anyway, and then seeing if I can remove these panels, cut the length of the bottom so that this can then come back together where it was. Alright, all the other glue blocks are already loose. Now figure out how this is still attached. It's barely attached. See if I can coax it to come loose. As near as I can tell, I think there's a block of wood in there that runs this way, that this board is glued to, and everything seems loose. The way it's pivoting, I think there's probably a nail there holding it in. I need to try to get that nail out. So to get that nail out, I think I'll start by removing these nails that attach the back so I can pry this back a little bit. See if I can get that nail to start. These are not original nails. You can see that they're replacement nails, which makes them a little easier to get out. And you can see those nails down in there. Still not enough for me to grab it. Now these two nails are very much original nails. So I will tape these nails here, and I'm going to try to get them right back where they belong before I'm done. As near as I can tell, there's just some glue blocks up in there that are holding it. I'm going to see if I can loosen those glue blocks and get this panel off. Alright. Yeah, it was just glued all along here with some of this funky glue I keep finding everywhere. So now you can see that I can just loosen all these other glue blocks. There's like 6 glue blocks that are holding in this panel and the other side panel, and I want to keep those together. You know, I'm having too much trouble working down in here. I think I'm going to go ahead and take this back off so I can get to these glue blocks. Okay, now I can access these glue blocks, get these panels off, and it's going to allow me, I realized, better able, I've got to cut back these dimensions of the bottom and here in order to pull this front together. Now I don't see any nails. I don't think I see any nails on this side, but we'll find out. I'll start trying to pry this off. Alright, good. I've got this whole bottom section off. This corner stayed together, which is good. And so now I can repair the bottom. And then I've got to shorten the length of the bottom, and I have to then trim these pieces just a little bit. I've got to figure out how I'm going to take any wood off of here, and how much to take off. Now I'm not sure how this bottom is attached. There may be some glue in there, but I don't see any evidence of nails going into that bottom. I'm just going to go back to these putty knives and see if I can work them in there. Okay, so now these pieces can come back together. This is where the big crack was. So I can glue this back together, but I'm not going to glue it up independent of the clock. And of course, if I tried to put this back together on the clock, the crack would open up again. I need to reduce the size of the bottom. The bottom is too long, and cut back the blocks on the upper case so that I can bring this back together like that. So now what I want to do is clamp this together, dry of course, so that I can determine what this inside dimension is. Okay, so I've got this together pretty much exactly where it's supposed to be. Alright, now I need to carefully measure this inside dimension. Now I want to measure, this is where the sides were attached against that board. Wow, 17 1/4. Okay, now I want to measure the bottom board. See what that was. Yeah, makes sense. It's 17 1/4, exactly the same. But wow. So what all this means is that to get this assembly back on here with no crack, I've got to cut the bottom board, cut the length of it by 5/16 of an inch, and I've got to cut 5/32 of an inch off of each side of this frame right here. And note I'm going to cut a little bit on the outside of my line. And plane it down to the line. Okay, so now I've got to cut the bottom to length, 16 7/8. I'm cutting about 3/8 off of this. I'm going to put the front of it, the part that goes against the front of the clock, against the fence, and I'm going to take about 3/16 off each side so that I know it's square. Now I'm going to clamp it together dry, see what it looks like. Alright, I think I'm ready to glue this up, but I think I want to remove this rosewood banding. It's a little bit in the way, and it's loose anyway, so figuring out how I'm going to clamp this up. And I'm thinking that what I might do is I might do the bottom first, kind of separately, and sort of get this box together somewhat, then put it on and glue the top section of it. Okay, I've got this rosewood banding off that was kind of in the way. I'm going to glue this together, the whole clock together in stages. I'm going to do this bottom section first because this is a very difficult glue up. It's tough because there's no real woodworking joints. These are just boards glued and nailed together. I'm going to glue it together. After the glue sets, I'm going to put in some nails to help reinforce it. There's nothing I can do about expansion and contraction the way it's built, but I hope that it's done all the shrinking that it's going to do and hopefully won't be a problem. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to leave this in clamps overnight, and tomorrow I'll glue this section to the upper part of the clock. Okay, this is dried overnight. I'm going to take these clamps off and then nail along here through the sides into the bottom board here, which was the way it was done originally. I'm going to mark out with tape where this bottom board is. Now I'm going to use some box nail brads made by this company, which has been making nails for 200 years. Okay, so now I need to glue the bottom section here, the base, to the midsection of the clock. Just want to make sure that the base is up where it's supposed to be, and I believe that it is. Okay, that's good.
A little more.
Okay, I feel pretty confident that everything where it's supposed to be. Okay, let's see what we got. That looks good. It's staying together. Now, I want to nail this just like I did for the lower borderland base, and then install all the glue blocks from behind. Okay, so now, just like if you remember, I nailed through these boards to connect it to the bottom. I'm going to put nails along here, so we're not just relying on glue to hold it to these rails. And I mean, it was nailed originally. These nails in the front were under this rosewood inlay, and the sides went through. You can see there where they were. All right, the next step is to start gluing down the veneer banding that I have. I've got quite a few pieces here, and I've got to figure out where they go. And once I've got those glued down, then start, a lot of this was missing, and so I'll get new veneer and start putting it down. Okay, this piece. I think I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to tape it down first, open it up, put the glue in. That way I think the tape will work better. I want to sand some of these pieces of veneer that came off of here so I can see exactly what the color and grain is like. The piece of veneer I sanded it turned really, really dark. The veneer on the front of this cabinet's kind of bleached out. So I've got to figure out what I'm going to use. This is my rosewood veneer, and I've got different types. I'm not real familiar. I think this is like Honduras. This is the Brazilian rosewood, probably the darkest. But I have these old strips that I saved that came off an old cabinet of rosewood veneer, and that's what I think I'm going to use. What I did is I glued down 3 types of veneer on this piece of scrap wood. I have a piece of veneer from the clock itself, a piece of veneer I have from an antique cabinet that looks good, and then this is the new veneer I have. And so I've sanded these 3 samples all the way up to 220, and now I'm going to give them a coat of shellac. I may have to give them eventually like 2 coats to really see what they look like. So I'm really liking my samples here. It's amazing how dark the original banding is off the clock. I think I'm going to go with my antique veneer. My new veneer isn't bad, but it's just darker than that. It's really kind of hard to tell. They're all pretty close. The antique veneer is probably lighter, and so I'm going to go with that. I realized I made these little squares. I better mark which way the grain is going. Okay, I've got 4 pieces here. I don't want to try to glue down too many at one time. Alright, I'm looking forward to seeing how this comes out. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Alright, I've got, I mean, it's down nice and flat, but I do have spaces which I'll have to fill. So now I'm just going to keep going. Keep gluing my pieces down on this side and that side. This old veneer is so brittle, it's chipping with the chisel. I think I'll try cutting it, or at least scoring it from above with the utility knife. Yeah, this is good. After taking off as much as I can with the utility knife, now the chisel can take it that last little bit. Before I start sanding, I've got a few gaps in some of my pieces, and I'm just going to fill them with a little wood putty first. Okay, I think I've got this sanded out fairly well with 100. I still need to sand with 150 and 220. But before I do that, I've been putting off some other things I have to do. I've got to flip this over, put the glue blocks in, and install the back. And I'm going to do that before I continue sanding. So I've got a piece of wood missing here. I've got some long corner blocks to put in these corners, corner blocks along the bottom here, and then on the very bottom corner blocks. And this is where I think I'll use the corner blocks that survive taking this apart. Alright, I've sanded this really well, all the way up to 220,
And now I'm going to put a coat of shellac on it. I've sanded the sides also with 220. I'm going to give them a coat also. Okay, so I'll let this dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'll do my touch-ups and then put on another coat. Okay, this coat is dried overnight, and so now I've got to do all my little touch-ups here. And I'm going to use a dye stain. Okay, now I'm ready for my second coat of shellac. Okay, so now that second coat is dried overnight, I'm going to sand with 320 and put on a third coat. And this third coat, I think I'll use a full strength shellac right out of the can. So I think this is ready to sand and put the final coat on. But before I do that, in this upper case here, there was a section here that's cracked. It was misaligned. I glued a thin piece of mahogany behind it on the back side to stabilize it. And now I want to fill that crack with wax. Now I'm going to sand the base with 500 and I'll put the final coat on it. You know, I haven't talked about this in the past, but this clock had clearly been refinished in the past. And the finish is a satin finish. It looks to me like probably a sprayed on lacquer. Now, I'm not going to do that to the base, but the shellac I've been putting on is very shiny. So for a final coat, I'm going to use satin tung oil, and hopefully that'll bring it in closer to the sheen of the rest of the clock. Okay, I've let this dry for a couple days now. Everything looks good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use paste wax. I'm going to use some steel wool, and I'm going to wax this whole case. My sheen on this base is maybe a little duller than this sheen. I'm hoping that the wax kind of brings it all together. But if my work's a little bit duller, that would be fine, actually. So I've gone over this whole panel with just, moderate pressure, trying to go as thoroughly and as evenly as I can with the steel wool. Then I'm going to take a rag, and I want to end up with a really light, even coat. You don't want to leave too much wax on the surface. You actually want to leave, as little as possible. So I want to make sure I clean off excess. Now I'll do the same thing to the sides, and then I'll move on to this midsection of the case and just do each surface the same way. So here you go, this nice tall case clock. If you remember, the main problem with this was that this front panel had cracked and it had shrunk up, and there was like a 3/16 crack along this area here. Lots of the rosewood banding was missing. I had to take this apart, resize the structure underneath to which it's attached, glue everything back together, replace all the rosewood that was missing. Luckily I had some nice antique rosewood veneer. And of course when I sanded this panel, the rosewood reverted back to its original color. The other rosewood on the piece is all faded out to be very similar color to the mahogany, but I decided that this rosewood's just going to have to fade out on its own over time, if that's what happens. I did a lot of other minor repairs to the case, and of course waxed it up, and yeah, I think it looks pretty good.
I'm Tom Johnson, Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. This is a nice tall case clock. The maker's name isn't on the clock face. We don't know who made it. I don't even know if it's English or American. It's probably early 19th century. And what happened was this clock fell forward and sustained some damage. The most noticeable thing that you first see is obviously the glass broke. The door's not in too bad a shape other than that. But it also, veneer chipped off the side, the whole upper case here is cracked here. And there's other places where it's loose and where veneer is chipped. We have the missing pieces. Most of the damage is in the bonnet here, where you can see the whole case has been cracked open. I'll start with the bonnet. I'm going to start with this side panel. I believe this is the most damaged area of the clock. I guess I'm going to see if I can get this panel, we'll basically kind of disassemble this, or at least partially disassemble this. I can see that this panel, it's tenoned into this lower piece of molding here, and it's just nailed at the top. I'll see if I can get it loose. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this piece of wood off of the side panel where it's tenoned. Tenons are really deep. I think I'll just try to remove this whole piece of wood along with the side. Okay, it's great. Got it out. This tenon down here, I suspect it was already at least halfway broken. It's a little messed up. I got to do something about that. But in the meantime, I'll see if I can get this molding off altogether, and then we'll have to figure out exactly
how we're going to repair this. I can see immediately I've got one problem right here where the part of the panel was pushed out on top of the other panel, and I've got to pry it back into where it belongs. And I don't think there's any way to do that without inflicting a little bit of damage. The question's going to be how much. Boy, there just doesn't seem to be any neat way to do it. I think I should use this knife because it's thin and relatively strong. I want to go in there and just pry it back and pop it back where it belongs. Any damage that might occur, I'll just have to repair afterwards. Man, these pieces of wood just do not want to move. And I actually lost a little chip out of there. I'm not happy about that. I think what I need to do is cut away, undercut this piece a little bit, and see if I can get it to go down. Well, so even though I've cut away some of the wood that was blocking me from putting it down where it belongs, it still doesn't want to go. I think I'm going to just clamp it down dry, see if I can force it down. I don't know what's holding it up. Boy, I think it's come down flat here, but man, it's really resisting it. It does seem to be going back down where it belongs. Okay, I'm setting up to clamp this. I cut a couple pieces of MDF. That's medium density fiberboard. I covered them with wax paper. And I'll clamp this between my two pieces. That'll make it really flat. There's a couple of issues. Even after I've clamped it flat this way, I've got to bring it together this way. And this edge I've got to clamp against. It's sort of a wedge-shaped piece. I think I'm going to cut a board, kind of that shape, that'll give me something to clamp against when I bring it together. Alright, I've got one more problem to address here before the glue up. I've got a big piece here that broke out of here during the accident. I thought it would just go right back in where it belongs, but it doesn't want to. Once again, you know, the way this thing broke, kind of like an explosion like that, and then it doesn't want to go back down where it belongs again. What I'm going to have to do is cut off a lot of the ragged pieces on either side of this break so that this can fit back in. Okay, after a lot of back and forth here, I think I've got it to a point where it can go down, so I guess it's time to try the glue up. Now before I tighten these clamps up too much, I've got to do my clamping this way. You know, I didn't mention earlier, but I had placed my caul on top here. I had put some pieces of tape in specific places where I knew I needed to have a lot of pressure with these larger size clamps. So there we go. I just got to wait. I'll take the clamps off maybe this afternoon and see if I got it. Boy, it certainly looks really good, and more importantly, too, it seems really flat. So I'm going to take a wet rag, clean all this glue off, and decide exactly what my next step will be. If the glue's being a little stubborn, you can always take a little water and a gray pad, go gently with it. That usually does the trick. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is glue this back piece on here. You know, I usually wait till I get a piece completely assembled before doing any touch-up work, but I think because this panel's here so nice and flat now with nothing in the way, I think I will go ahead, fill in these voids I need to fill in and the cracks and sand them, and then polish this out and get this looking almost 100% before I proceed to put this case together. Okay, so now I'll sand the family wood with 150. Okay, everything's nicely leveled off with 150, so I'll switch to 220, and I'll just do the 220 by hand. All right, I've gone over the entire panel with a little 220, and now I'm going to brush on a coat of shellac. Okay, I'll let that dry for a couple hours. Now I've let this dry for 3 hours, but I'm going to sand it and put another coat on. I want to get this area, it really absorbed a lot more into the areas I sanded, so I kind of want to get it leveled off and smooth before I do the touch-ups. I realize there's something else I need to do to this panel. It slipped my mind. This panel on the side of the bonnet here, this lower rail is tenoned into the front rail, and that tenon broke. It goes right here, and you can see. Before I do anything else to the finish, I'm going to cut this tenon. It's great, I got the original marks here from the original maker when they marked out this tenon, so I'll use those marks. And I'll probably cut about a ½ inch deep or so. I think that this big tenon cut through this tenon, but as I replace it, I'm going to probably cut into the big tenon. I think it's got plenty of strength there.
Alright, that's the first mortise cut. I've just got to glue back those chunks of wood that came out from the tenon from this piece. And then I've got 3 more to cut, but of course this one shouldn't be nearly as bad. This is the old tenon itself. It should clean right out of there here, as opposed to where I'm cutting a new tenon. You're cutting a new mortise for the new tenon. This I just have to clean out the old tenon. This is the inner panel that surrounds the face of the clock. Alright, I've got a bunch of pieces here. The people really say did a good job. Some of them are pretty obvious where they go and some not so obvious. I've got to figure it out and start gluing them back. So I've milled up some wood here to make tenons for all the mortises. I've just got to go over each one and fit them, and I'm going to put them all together to dry, of course, before I glue it up. Boy, I'm fitting this all together dry for the first time, and I hadn't noticed before that this top part is cracked pretty badly too. I got to bring that back to where it belongs. Okay, I'm going to try to work glue into all these areas and just clamp it back again. It doesn't move now. I can't even really try it out. I'm going to try injecting some glue down in here too with this little syringe. Might help me get it down in there. This little syringe thing puts the glue right where you want it. I'm going to have to use that more often. So now we can turn our attention to the main case here. It does have some problems, not nearly as many as the bonnet, but it's got some issues here. I'm going to start by removing the door. As you can see, one of the problems with these clock cases is that a lot of times there's not any joinery going on. There's some, as we saw with the mortise and tenon joints in the crown piece, but these are just blocks of wood, all just kind of glued together. It can be problematic trying to get them back where they belong. So I've scraped off the glue off all these pieces and got my knife down in here as best I could. There's no real way to even clamp this together. I think I can just work glue into everywhere and just put these back where they go, and maybe tape this to get a little pressure this way. I'll give it a try. So as I'm dry fitting this together, in other words, without glue, you know, I'm discovering lots of small repairs. Well, some not so small, like I discovered, you know, that I needed to glue this whole section, which came out fine, but there's still some loose molding I've got to glue. I just realized there's a big piece of veneer missing right here from this corner. I'll probably find a couple other things before I'm done, but I'm going to get those repaired and get really close to the glue up. Okay, I think I'm ready to glue this up. You have to realize that off camera I've put this together and taken it apart about 4 times. You know, each time it was very difficult, and figuring out little things that were wrong and fixing them and clamping it. So now I'm ready to do it. There's not really that much glue, really just in this joint down here. The top gets nailed on, but I'll do that afterwards. I'll still clamp it into place to make sure I've got everything aligned. So I really want to make sure that these miters are together, you know, perfectly. Okay, that's good for now. And tomorrow I'll nail this upper piece on. These corners came together really well. And so now I need to re-nail this top section to the sides. You know, when working on antiques, I always try hard to be aware of the techniques and the level of craftsmanship that went into the original building. I try to mimic that when doing my repairs. It also kind of gives you a connection to the people that built this clock. So in that spirit, now I've got to pound these huge nails into this nice antique clock from the inside, because that's how they attach the side, this top piece to the side panels. Okay, now back to the main case here.
This is a good example of a common problem. There's inlay in the face of this clock. The grain of the inlay runs perpendicular to the grain of the panel, which runs this way. The panel shrunk, the inlay comes up. I've got to cut a little piece out of it and glue it back down. So now I think I've got everything glued down. It's got to get glued down. I'll probably find something else along the way, but now I'm going to take each side of the cabinet. I'm going to gently clean it with a little bit of a commercial cleaner. I want to get off mostly my glue and anything else that's on here. Alright, now I can start work on the door. The main thing with the door is the broken glass. Okay, the second attempt at cutting the glass worked fine. It fits really well into the frame, so I'll install it with glazing putty. Alright, I think I'm finished all the repairs, and as you saw before, I've already started the cleaning process. And so now I'll show you exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to use the door as an example, which I'm just going to gently clean it with my commercial cleaner here, and I'm going to wax it. And I have a nice wax here, and it's a dark brown wax. I don't think it's going to really change the color of the piece, but the dark wax, when it gets in all the little defects and everything, will be dark. So I'll show you what I'm going to do. And then once I feel I have the wax down really well, this is a rag that I keep just for buffing wax. This door looks good. I'll let this wax dry. Maybe tomorrow I'll buff it again or something. So now I'll move on to the case. I've already cleaned most of the case. I just need to get to the waxing part of it. Now this section I cleaned, but it also had some spots on it, maybe water hit it or something, so I'm going to use a little bit of 4-0 steel wool and the wax, just gently. So I said, when I repaired this panel, I said I was going to finish this touch-up before I assembled it, and I ended up not doing it, so I've got to deal with it now. The first thing I'm going to do is just sand it. I put 2 coats of shellac on it. I'm going to sand it with 500. Then I'm going to color that. And then I'll seal it in with a spray shellac aerosol. Okay, I've let the shellac dry, and the stain doesn't look bad at all. Luckily, areas of it are just a little lighter. That's a dark spot. I'm going to touch it up, these little light spots, with a marker, a real fine tip marker, and then seal it once again with the shellac. So here we go, this beautiful antique tall case clock. If you remember, what happened was it fell forward and suffered a lot of damage, especially to this side of the bonnet was completely smashed up. The glass was broken, and there was numerous problems and repairs with the moldings and side of it. There was just a lot of minor repairs, but thank goodness everything worked out. And I think it looks pretty good. I'm Tom Johnson, Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. This is the bonnet of a long case clock from England about 1830. I don't have the case here, I only have the bonnet. That's what I'm going to repair now. It's got a lot of veneer problems. This banding is popping off along here. Luckily, we've got a lot of the pieces that go with that. There's boards that are coming loose that were glued, joints. Also, the door has a small veneer problem. The wood or veneer is fractured in this area here. Now, I don't know what's going on there, but I've got to remove this glass and reinstall it. It wasn't installed correctly last time someone did it, and I'll figure that out then. This upper section here, you know, the whole molding here is kind of curved back. That's just something that's happened with age. We're not going to do even attempt to do anything about that. I think I'll start with this case itself, because I've got all these pieces, and then see what I've got here. I'm sure while I'm doing that, I'll discover all the other places that might be loose. So I kind of like to start, you know, on the inside, work my way out. And this board, I don't know what you call this board exactly, but it's a little facing board which surrounds the clock face. I notice it's loose, it's attached to the side, and the side is loose. So I think I need to glue the side back and get everything in place here first. All right, while I'm letting this dry, I'll start on the door. I don't think I need to take these hinges off yet. This one has a screw protruding. I really don't like that, but I'm going to leave it alone for now. I'm going to take this putty out and get the glass out first. So I've been working and working along the edge of this glass, trying to get it clear of the putty, but the glass seems really tight in the frame and really doesn't want to move. And of course there's putty on the other side of this piece of glass, you know, between the glass and the frame. So I think I'm going to try to gently heat up this side of it while pushing down as much as I dare to try to get it to start to move. Once you get your knife under this loose veneer, it's always difficult to know how far to push it. So I'm just gently probing, not too hard. You know, I feel like if I forced hard enough, I could probably take all this veneer up. But it's down. You just sort of have to play it by ear and probe as much as you dare.
part of this veneer didn't go down. It's still up. Maybe I needed more clamping pressure, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm this up, loosen this up a bit, and I may then down here at the end of the piece of veneer remove a little bit of veneer so that I can push this flat again. Well, this is good. I didn't realize that the piece of veneer actually extended all the way under the rest of the veneer, this little piece of holly. And so I don't really have to trim it. Now I can glue it down, and it should afterwards, then I might just have to trim off the end a little bit and then replace, then I'll glue down the piece of holly when I glue this down. All right, well, I'm waiting for this to dry. I'll get back on the door. I've got loose veneer here, and there's this crack, which always worried me, and I'll work some glue in there, and I can clamp all this down at once. So note, when I'm gluing this up, the piece of veneer I cut isn't thick enough, even though it's a nice old antique veneer that's pretty thick. It's not as thick as this veneer on the door frame, so I cut an additional piece. I'll glue down 2 pieces to make up the thickness.
So I've got two areas of concern here. One's not bad. I got this piece is cracked right along here, this weak point, and glue that back. This part's a little more troubling. This veneer is broken. I have the pieces, but they're just hanging out in the middle of the thin air. So I think what I'm going to need to do is cut this back a little bit and glue a new piece of veneer in there. You'll see that I cut two pieces, once again to get the required thickness. I think I'm ready now to start gluing down the curve banding along the line here. We have quite a few of the pieces, and there's a couple missing. All right, while I'm waiting for this glue to dry, I can get back on the door.
right next to my patch there, I had a little bit of misalignment, so I heated it up. I've reclamped it. I think I can take these clamps off now. These have been on for about 4 hours, and then continue gluing that little banding. Oh wow, one of my pieces is misaligned, so I should be able just to heat it up and clamp it back down again. Okay, so now I've just got 2 places where I've got to put in some new veneer. Okay, while these dry, I can get back on the door again. So yesterday, while working on this door frame, in 2 places, this delicate veneer that overlaps or sticks out past the frame cracked in 2 places. I had to glue it. I did that off camera, I'm sorry. But what I decided was, what I need to do is install the glass, because the glass will help support this piece of veneer while I then finish sanding and finishing the front.
Okay, so the glass is in the door. I'm going to let that set for a little while, and in the meantime I'll get back to this little row of banding I've glued down. Now I'll see if I can clean this glue off with a damp rag. Now I'll sand my new patches of wood. Okay, I've sanded this whole little edge of banding here with 220. I filled in some of the spaces between the pieces of veneer, and I think now it seems great. The next step, the color's good. I'm not going to do any staining ahead of time. I'm going to go ahead and seal this with a couple coats of shellac, and once I have it really leveled off with the shellac and really smooth, then I'll go back and do my touch-ups and color work. Now I've also been sanding my repair areas on the door frame. And now I'm going to go over the whole door frame just lightly with this 220. And then I'm going to brush a coat of shellac on the frame. And the little banding above the door. So I put another coat of shellac on last night, and I put an extra amount on my new pieces. And now I'm going to sand with 500. I hope you can see that how grainy the wood is. It's very grainy. So what I want to do is sand the shellac, try to level that out so the grain is all filled in. You can also see on the door, although when I applied the coat, it looked beautiful, but as it dries, you know, it looks a little uneven because it's just my first coat. So I'm going to sand that with 500 and give that a coat too. And once again, especially emphasizing getting my new pieces of wood, all the grain filled in. So this is leveled off pretty nice, you know, pretty well. I mean, it's not really level. There's still ups and downs between the pieces of veneer. I didn't try to make this level, but the finish is leveling off nicely. I think you can still see where my new piece still is a little grainy. You can see it because there's white in the grain, but generally speaking it's done pretty nice. The next coat should look great. So after I've sanded it as much as I can with 500, there's still shiny places. Those are low places. I'm not going to try to cut down to those. I'm not trying to level this off, but I'll go over it with a Scotch-Brite gray pad, and that sort of gets down in there and takes the gloss off and is helpful before the next coat. All right, I let this coat dry overnight. It looks a lot better than the first coats, naturally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this again with 500. And then go over it with the gray pad. And now I'll then color in my patches and other touch-ups and stuff that I need to do. All right, now I'll wipe these areas off with some paint thinner and do my touch-ups. I'm going to start off by brushing on some medium brown walnut dye stain. Okay, that's all for now. I'm going to let this stain dry. It's a fast drying stain. I'll give it an hour or maybe two, and then I'm going to pad some finish on here and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, stain's dried. Now I'm going to pad some finish on. I like using this lacquer that's made for French polishing. Alright, I'm going to let this coat dry overnight, and my touch-ups are still light. I think I'll probably tone them with a little aerosol tomorrow. Alright, it's not looking bad, but when I patted it I did take off some of the color on my touch-up, so I should have sealed it with aerosol first. But what I'm going to do now is use aerosols to get my final color on my touch-ups. Alright, I'm going to use a medium brown walnut toner. So the medium brown walnut toner was kind of the right color, but it wasn't dark enough, so I just sort of dusted them with a little extra dark walnut. I think it looks good. Let's see. Yeah, I think that looks good. So I think I'm going to give these areas a quick coat of aerosol lacquer just to seal in my color work. Just these areas here before I start padding again. Alright, my lacquer dried, so now I'm going to pad it again with the padding lacquer. Alright, I think I can start the waxing process now. I'm just using some paste wax I got from the hardware store, but it has brown coloring in it. It's brown wax. There's so many little nooks and crannies and corners here that as I wax, if any, it'll help color them up. Kind of like working like a scratch cover kind of thing.
I'm also using a little steel wool here just to help clean and smooth the surface. A stencil brush helps with the corners.
So there we go. This is the bonnet of a early 19th century tall case clock, and it had quite a few problems with the banding along here. The door had a crack in it. The glass itself was misaligned. The panels were cracked, but everything went back where it was supposed to. I think it looks pretty good.